I'm Connie Cirillo-Freeman. I'm the Director of Arts and Culture and Seniors here at the JCC. And we're so pleased to have many of you here tonight for our J-Talk with Brian Kriftcher. J-Talks are designed to focus on people who have done amazing, unique, and compelling things in our community and have very exceptional achievements that people admire and wonder about how have they been able to do this. And so Brian is certainly one of those people. He is the former president and longtime board member of our Stanford JCC. He and his family have been among our community's major philanthropists and volunteers, including, among other things, having named the Stanford JCC's Legacy Gymnasium in memory of Brian's father, Noel, a longtime public high school and college educator. Brian coached successful boys and girls basketball teams at several Maccabi games through the JCC. Professionally, Brian spent nearly 20 years on Wall Street before retiring at the age of 40 to devote his full-time energies to his lifelong passions for teaching, coaching, and community work. Brian is the boys varsity basketball head coach at Notre Dame Fairfield High School and is the varsity basketball, and is the founder and president of Stanford Peace Youth Foundation, which uses the game of basketball, formal academic support, and mentoring to positively influence more than 1,000 local area youth. Brian is also a longtime board member and former global chairman of Peace Players International, which through basketball bridges divides and develops leaders among children and communities in conflict globally. For his impact on young people through coaching, Brian was recently named a national finalist for Positive Coaching Alliance's Double Goal Coach Award presented by Team Snap. His is truly an inspiring story of one man's passion to follow his dreams. It's my pleasure to introduce Brian Kriftcher, or Coach K.
Connie, thanks so much for the opportunity. Nancy, thanks. I know Marshall Curland sent me a text. I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate all my friends and family and others that are on the call with us. First things first, you'll forgive my voice. You know, somehow when I worked on Wall Street, I never ended up with a sore throat, but having coaching, certainly this is an occupational hazard. And so you'll bear with me. I want to start with a couple of things. First of all, it is an incredible honor for me to talk as part of J-Talks. The JCC has been such an incredible part of mine and my family's life since we moved to Stanford in 1996. I assure you, and many of you that are on the call, I know have known me for a long time. And so I assure you, I don't think there's anything miraculous or particularly inspiring about my story. Like anyone else, whatever success I've had have been a function of four things: a little bit of heart, smarts, guts, and luck, with an abundance of that last thing. And I think if there's something that is unique, maybe it's that I've gotten to share the luck that I've gotten and that I've had with others, which I think is unique and something that I take great pride in. I'm a big believer in the idea that if you want to know what somebody cares about, you have to look no more deeply than the entries in their checkbook and the entries in their calendar, because the two scarce commodities, you know, the thing that nobody has an unlimited supply of is time and money. And as a result, you know, I think when it comes to the JCC, it's been a centerpiece of mine and my family's life, and a centerpiece of our checkbook and calendar since 1996. And so it's a place that has great pride for us. I'll also, if you bear with me, I'll just mention something about time, because I think there's also a notion that as I was asked to do this, that I started thinking about time. And I just turned 55 years old, and I think that it's incredibly hard for me to believe that I'm 55 years old, and that, but even harder to believe is that not the notion that I retired from Wall Street when I was 40, but the idea that I've been at this work for 15 years, and the idea that the last firm, and I'll talk a little bit about my professional career, but the last firm that I was with, I helped start a firm called Satellite Asset Management. We were reasonably successful, and we were at that for 8 years. And it is just to think that I've been at community and youth development work for nearly twice the time that we had Satellite, puts things in perspective. And as my kids will tell you, I say a lot that there's a big difference between looking at yourself in the mirror every single day versus if you look at a picture of yourself from 10 years ago. One, you see no changes. The other, you see incredible changes. And so in speaking about, in introducing sort of my life over the past 15 years, today, day to day, it hasn't seemed like there's any change. And yet I reflect on it, what's changed over the course of, these 15 years. It's just pretty incredible to me. And so I thank you also for allowing me to reflect on that, because taking a second to smell the roses and appreciate how much I've been impacted, let alone how much I've had the opportunity to impact others, is something that's not lost on me, and that I really appreciate that opportunity. Last thing, by way of introduction, I'll talk about David Brooks, the renowned columnist, New York Times columnist and author, talks in his book, The Road to Character, about there being two parts of you. One is the resume part, and the other is the eulogy part. And, the resume part being the part of you that talks about what you've done. Whereas the eulogy part talks about how you've done it. I assure you, from my perspective, the resume part is boring, and the eulogy part is maybe a little less boring, but I'll try to share both parts of you, both parts of my background with you in telling the story, and hope to inspire you in some fashion along those lines. It all starts inevitably with my family, my immediate family for sure, but the family that I grew up with. I grew up in a town on Long Island, a small, predominantly Irish and Italian town, and where there wasn't an abundance of Jews. And my Jewish faith was incredibly important to us. My dad and mom were educators. My mom became an educator later in life. My dad was an educator from the outset of his career. He passed away 10 years ago, almost to the day, and was an incredible inspiration to me, as is my mom and my stepmom and my brother and sister. The family was really focused on, there were 4 pillars. And it's only on reflection that, I sort of realized how influential each one of these was on me. But the pillars were family, faith, education, and athletics. And they were all really, really important and impactful in my life. Family, goes without saying, was vital, and was something that shared memories were a big part of what we focused on. Faith, our Jewish heritage was very important. as well as our observances and family opportunities there. Education was, for lack of a better term, the family business. My father was an English teacher, a later assistant superintendent, became a high school principal for most of my childhood, and then adolescence, and then became superintendent of schools for Brooklyn and Staten Island. And I say that because with education as important in our lives as it was hard to, even as professionally I moved in a different direction, it always stayed close to heart, the idea that we were here for a greater purpose, that we had a responsibility to make the world better than when we inherited it. I remember in college one time walking into the gym for practice one day, and I saw somebody, and he happened to be an African-American kid who I didn't know, but he was walking into the gym and he had on his jacket Seward Park track. And my dad had been principal of Seward Park High School, and I walked over to him and said, "Did you go to Seward Park?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you know the principal?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What'd you think of him?" He said, "Wow, he was tough, but he was fair." And when I reflect on my dad and some of the lessons I learned, certainly the idea of being tough but fair was something that still resonates with me deeply. Similarly, I think back to having grown up in a town where, again, it was predominantly Irish and Italian, and I was influential insofar as some of my greatest friends, they knew of Judaism, they knew of being kosher because that's the way I grew up. And so we influenced one another deeply. And I think about my childhood and the effect that my father and mother, having taught in and administered in the New York City public schools, and appreciations of racial difference, all that I learned about recognizing that people are people came from the influences of my parents and their professional experiences in the inner city through public education and sports. And when I look at my life today, it is entirely a function of those things being very, very important. And so my life has been a mosaic, and I've been very, very fortunate in that respect. And so I'll fast forward a little bit. I went to State University of New York at Albany. I got out of school. There were a couple of pathways that I could take, but I was very passionate about sports for sure, and wanted to study law, and went to St. John's University to law school at night. Went to work and met Jeannie at the American Arbitration Association, where I worked for altogether about 18 months, and then had an opportunity to go to Wall Street, and went to work at Cantor Fitzgerald, which anybody that knows that firm knows that it was decimated on 9/11. Thankfully, I wasn't there. Unfortunately, many friends were. I was there when the bombing took place in 1993. The first time, Bin Laden took a shot at the World Trade Center. I've got dear friends who perished then. And while I wouldn't say that was something that comes into play every day of my life, certainly it's something that I reflect on when I think about how fortunate I've been and the opportunities that I've had in my life and the opportunities that passed others by. And so with that, that's been an opportunity also to pay forward the great benefits that I've had. So I started my career at Cantor Fitzgerald, and was very fortunate. I was working for the triumvirate of guys that were running that firm, and they gave me some incredible work to do early on in my career. Here I was, and I speak all the time about how lucky I was in that I was going to law school at night and been giving work that associates at the greatest law firms in the country were getting, and I hadn't even gone through law school yet. And so it was a function of not much more than I was willing to work hard, and they had a need, and I had a perspective that there was no job too big or too small, that I was going to do anything that I could to contribute. And so I did. And I used to kid that there are people that worked as hard as they could in high school to go to the best universities they could, worked as hard as they could in college to go to the best law school they could, worked as hard as they could in law school to make law review and go to the best law firm, only to get the job that I had been given already. And so when I talk about luck, and my dad used to talk about, he used to refer to luck as, a variety of things. And Branch Rickey talked about, luck being by design, and luck being, where preparation meets opportunity. And I believe in all those things, but I also believe in that, there are opportunities come up every single day, and it's a matter of seizing on them and seizing the moment. And I think that's what I had an opportunity to do. And that's what, fortunately, I did. So I spent several years at Cantor. Then I went to Neuberger Berman, spent a couple of years there, and then got plucked to go to work for SAC Capital, which when I joined it, it was very small. There were 20 people. We were managing a small amount of money. Steve Cohen, of renown today, was known only to folks in, on Wall Street. And he obviously is renowned and owns the New York Mets. And I had the opportunity to work directly for him as his chief operating officer and general counsel. And that too was an incredible opportunity, an incredible life lesson for me, and left there and had the opportunity to start a firm with some colleagues who had been, while I was at SAC, they were at George Soros's firm. And so we partnered and started a firm called Satellite Asset Management. And as I said before, had the firm, we started in 99, and we had the firm until I left in 2006. And in some way, that marks the beginning of the story. And I don't think it's an exaggeration. It's probably too lofty language, but it's not an exaggeration to say in 2006 I was born again, and I was done. And it wasn't in a religious context, but it was the idea that what was vitally important to me when I was a kid was those 4 pillars that my parents had taught me and that were emphases for us. And here I was in 2006, and I had the opportunity to make them my own again. And I used to kid that when I was younger, all I wanted was the key to the gym. That's really, to me, that marked, that would have been success enough, just to have the key to the gym. And here I was in 2006, I had the opportunity to make this pivot and make this fulcrum between basketball and education, my own. And so with that, I did. And there are so many life lessons in it. And if you bear with me one sec, I just want to share with you a quote from a movie that it's not a well-known movie, but it came out in 2007, and I remember it fondly. It had for some reason, it had an impact on me. It's called Evan Almighty, and it's a comedy / poignant film about that's a takeoff on the story of Noah and the Ark. And Steve Carell's in the movie, and there's a point at which Morgan Freeman, who plays God in the movie, he's talking to Steve Carell about this this journey he's on, where God has told him to make this ark, and Morgan Freeman's talking to him, and he says, if someone prays for patience, you think God gives them patience, or does he give them the opportunity to be patient? If he prayed for courage, does God give him courage, or does God give him opportunities to be courageous? If someone prayed for family to be closer, do you think God zaps them with warm, fuzzy feelings, or does he give them opportunities to love each other? And for me, the idea of, this journey, this opportunity, was an opportunity that was given to me. And it's so ironic right now that we're on the phone we're on this Zoom call at the JCC, because in 2006, the JCC hosted the Maccabi games, the JCC Maccabi games. And I was invited to coach. And what I left out in my background is that basketball had always been, a incredible passion of mine. I got the opportunity to play a couple of years in college, and I played all through high school. And it was an incredible passion of mine. And I played all through. I participated all through, and I coached on the side. But in 2006, I got this opportunity to coach as part of the Maccabi games. And one of my players was my oldest nephew, and another of my players was the son of a former partner of mine at Satellite. And and so I was coaching, and while we played, this partner of mine, we played pickup basketball together. He had never seen me coach, and I had this opportunity to coach his son. And I remember he walked over to me and said, afterwards, he said, wow, I never see you like that. And I won't call it an epiphany, but it was certainly eye-opening, this idea that it was so joyful for me to impart these lessons that I had learned, and to get to share the game that I loved. And while it wasn't an epiphany, it was pivotal. And I certainly hadn't burned out on Wall Street, nor did I, people ask me all the time, how did you know? And 2006 was an incredible time to have picked to leave. And what I knew was that there were other things that I wanted to do. And what I knew that the world was changing, and a great lesson about investing was the lesson that if it felt really hard, or it felt like you were grinding, then you were probably pushing too hard. And it was probably a sign that the best was behind you. And what I can tell you about 2006 was it felt like you had to work really, really hard just to stay in the same spot. And firms were, at that time, opening offices overseas, and people were having to open offices in Hong Kong. And it just felt like we were working really, really hard to stay in the same spot. And it turned out that was a pretty good indicator that the market was getting ready to crash. But for me, it wasn't anything to do with the markets. It was simply the idea that, and this is the best way I can come up with articulating why I did what I did. But it was a function that what I was incrementally going to make, and there were people by far that made more than I did over the years, And I know that there were people that I made a lot more than. But whatever I was going to incrementally make, it was no longer worth what I was giving up to make it. And what I was giving up was, to use a phrase that my dad used to use, was to help kids dream. And, one thing, and inevitably I can't, and this is, when I say my dad, I talk about not just my dad, my mom for sure, my stepmom for sure, but those of influence, used to talk about how what my dad used to love people asking him, what do you make? Because as an educator, inevitably, when people talk about what do you make, people inevitably think about the financial rewards of your job. But my dad used to love to ask people to ask what you make, because he used to say, what do I make? I make kids think. I help kids dream. That's what he made. And for me, what I was going to incrementally make financially was no longer what I was giving up to make it. And so with that, I went in and shortly after that, I spoke to my partners about having made the decision that I was going to leave. And I don't know that I would refer to myself as type A. I'm certainly impassioned, and I'm a reasonably hard worker, and I can grind when I need to grind, but I'm not sure I would call myself type A. But my partners at the time, particularly one of them said, you'll be back in 6 months. And I said, no, I really won't. This is it. I've decided that I want to pursue, I'm not retiring, but I am changing careers. And with that, I left, and I left Wall Street behind and began this metamorphosis of, this transformation to using basketball as a tool of positive influence on kids. It's important for me to note that I was devoting myself to making a difference, and I went to, and it wasn't easy. And I remember having a conversation with a friend, a Wall Street friend, who still on Wall Street, didn't make the decision that I made, has been able to many, many times over. And he would articulate it as, I don't have either the passion or the guts to be able to do it. And so when I talk about having gotten lucky, one of the ways in which I've been most lucky is because I had this amazing passion for something other than what I was doing for a living. And I was incredibly fortunate to have had that in basketball, and to have had that in education and in faith and in family. And so that was a great a point of great fortune for me. So I left, and Jeannie would tell anybody, I'm not ashamed of it, but I certainly acknowledge it. The day that I left, I had a panic attack. And I had a panic attack, the likes of which you can't even imagine, having never had one before, because all of a sudden, I confronted what I had just done. And I remember, it's not that I hadn't thought about it ahead of time. I did. But amazingly, what I thought about afterwards was, what am I going to tell people I do? And that, in some ridiculous fashion, that became something that occupied my thoughts over the next 72 hours. What am I going to tell people I do? And I remember night one going on monster.com because I couldn't sleep at all. And Jeannie's like, what are you doing? I said, well, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I told people that I was going to teach, and I was going to coach, and I was going to devote myself to philanthropic work, and I better get on with this. And she said, well, you just left today. And I said, yeah, but I got to get on with this. And And it had a lot more to do with these sort of external factors than it had to do with anything material in my own life that I had to get on with. But I remember sitting down with my daughters at the time, and Hannah, Charlotte, and Sophie were young. I want to say Sophie was, maybe 4. Right. Sophie was 4. Charlotte was 7. Hannah was 8.5 or 9. And I remember I sat down with them, and this was my big moment. I said, because I didn't want to be, and I think part of it was there were older people that were telling me, people much older than me saying, you retired at 40, make sure you have something to go back to, because, if you don't, you're going to end up, punishing your kids or being derelict to your kids, because you have a responsibility to show them a work ethic, and an idle mind is the devil's play toy, and all of these things about how to do nothing was going to be a problem for me. And so I reached out at that point to the girls, and I sat down with them, and I said, I got to ask you a question. I said, what do I do? What do you think I do? How would you tell your friends what I do? And they said, well, you're a teacher and a basketball coach. And I said, all right, that sounds pretty good. I'll go with that. And I said, well, what I used to do. And they said, we have no idea. And at that point, it occurred to me that, what I learned in spades later on from a dear friend, Rabbi Daniel Cohen, who's a friend and rabbi in our community. I sat down with him and articulated to him and shared with him that I had this moment. And he said, look, it's rabbinic wisdom that you are not what you do. What you do is generally what you do for a living. What you are is far different from that. And I think that was day one of this sort of awakening to this new life, to this being born again. And so with that, I went and I taught for a couple of years. I was fortunate, a former investor of ours, had a contact at a private middle school in New York, and he said, "Why don't you reach out to their headmaster?" I reached out to their headmaster, and the unique thing about this school was that it not only was private, and so you didn't have to be a certified teacher, but it was a private, all boys, substantially, overwhelmingly boys of color middle school in New York City on the Lower East Side, or in Alphabet City of New York. And it was a tuitionless school where fundraising or donations paid for the tuition, but it was for kids who showed academic promise, but who couldn't afford a regular private school, a typical New York City private school experience. And so they were being saved through this private middle school. And this investor of ours introduced me to the headmaster, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to teach. I really want to try my hand at teaching. I can't devote full time to it, but I'd like to teach." And he said, "So what do you want to teach?" I said, "Look, I think I could teach economics. I think I could teach, civics, having studied political science." Then I said, "I could teach things about the law. I could probably give something on leadership." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you create your own curriculum and teach civics? We have a need for a civics teacher." And so I said, "All right, I'll try that." And I did, and I ended up doing it for 3 years. And it once again gave me this appreciation for difference and for, racial social justice, for racial equality, for opportunities and the lack thereof, and for the opportunity gap that too often exists between inner city youth and other youth. And unfortunately, my dad took ill, and so I took leave of teaching. I was coaching basketball at one of our local high schools, and I was coaching at the time the freshman boys team. And unfortunately, and some will probably some will be unhappy with this statement, but there was a period of time where there were more boys going to prison from one of our local city high school basketball programs than going to college. And to me, it was a crime. They had more athletic capability and more athletic capability, certainly, than in their pinky than I had in my whole body. And yet I was able to use this game to transport me to another place. And this game was using them. And so with that, dear friend of mine, Lenwood Lotta, and I sat down and I said, I want to use this game as a tool of positive influence on local inner city youth. And so with that started Stanford Peace. We started it with a group of 9 and 10-year-old boys. And from its outset, and I'm going to take a miniature step backwards and just share 2 stories. One was from a kid that was on the varsity when I was a freshman coach. And here I came at this and I said, I'm going to help these kids. I'm going to deep dive into this work and try to use the experiences that I've had to transport them. And one of the descriptions that my dad used to say is, kids that are colorblind or people that are colorblind can't dream in color. It's not, when you're colorblind, you dream in the colors that you see every day, which are black and white. And so how do you ask a kid that is born without the technicolor life to dream in color? And so my goal was to help them to dream in color. And I sat down with a kid at that time, and he was 18 years old, and he was a senior. And I said, I'm not going to use his first name, but I said, Joe, I want to help you use your talents to get you to college. What are you planning on doing next year? And he was already a senior, a second semester senior at that point. And he said, Coach, I appreciate it. He said, in my neighborhood, we don't make plans. We think day to day. Now, we're not talking about a neighborhood of, Bedford-Stuyvesant, or a neighborhood of Compton, where unfortunately you can learn or expect, or it's portrayed to be that way too many times. We're talking about Stamford, Connecticut, where its wealth spans Greenwich's and its poverty spans, the poorest community around. And here's somebody, in my community was saying, was commenting that they dream day to day, or they think day to day. The other is a kid who I coached directly, and he was 12 years old, and I mentioned to him, I said, you're going down a bad path. And I said, do you want to end up in the position that your dad's in? Do you want to end up behind bars? And he said, Coach, I know everything you're doing for me, but I don't want to end up there, but I know that that's where I'm going to end up. And those 2 stories together became the impetus in many, many ways for Stanford Peace and the work that we did afterwards. And so we started with this one team of 9 and 10-year-old boys. And the emphasis from that outset was that basketball is a privilege. your job as a young person is to do your chores at home, to be a good citizen, and to do your best in school. And that, I would say to kids, you don't have to meet me halfway. You don't have to meet me, you don't have to meet me 30% of the way, maybe 20% of the way. I'll meet you the other 80% of the way, and together we'll try to get you the rest. Just have skin in the game, and we're going to try to get you to this next place. And so this team that we started with one group of 9 and 10-year-old boys, in the end, we had 6 of them not only go to college, but play basketball in college. We had 3 or 4 of them ultimately on full scholarships. The next year's team, we had 5 kids play Division I basketball, and including at places like Auburn, at Colgate University, at LIU Brooklyn, at St. Peter's, at Purdue. So some incredible stories of grit and success. For the first time, they started using the game in the fashion that we felt we could use it. Every year, we'd add another team to it, to the point where at its largest, we had about 1,000 or 1,200 kids all together playing basketball in a series of teams and youth leagues and camps and clinics, all using the game of basketball as both a formative instructional tool in and of itself. So there are certain lessons you learn from team participation, but also as a hook to be able to influence kids positively in outside of or off the court. It's been a gift to me more than it's been from me. Stanford Peace, we started in 2013 with a dear friend, Andy Sclover. He and I started something called our Beyond Limits academic program, which teaches, which tutors kids on a peer-to-peer basis in math and science. And so what we do is juniors, seniors, local college students, we pay them between $15 and $20 an hour to come to our offices and teach local 4th through 12th graders, to tutor them in math and science. And so we've got about 200 kids that come to our offices every day, twice a week, that come in for academic tutoring. And we help them to use academics as the lifeline that it really is. And so starts with being able to encourage them in that direction through basketball, to encourage them in that direction through enrichment activities. But then it's not enough to tell them they need to fish. We teach them how to fish so that we can feed them hopefully for a lifetime. And so we have kids coming every single day, and we tutor them. And so we've got about 35 sessions every single day where kids come in and they're doing peer-to-peer tutoring. We pivoted in that respect. We pivoted at last March. As soon as the pandemic hit, we recognized that we wouldn't be able to as easily get in the gym. We wouldn't as easily be able to host kids at our offices. And so we began tutoring remotely. We began training kids in basketball, ball handling, and doing coaching sessions via Zoom. And that persisted for much of last spring and the summer. And then we began getting back in the gym last summer. And the influence has been, even in that respect, has been profound. We had a group of Division I college girls that had weekly or bi-weekly open gyms with us, simply because they didn't have places to play, and we had the availability to us of a gymnasium, and so we began using that for them. I'll stop there and just emphasize one other thing which bears note, and that's one of the things that the reason why we called it Stanford Peace, because it's the teams we play against, I assure you, are not, don't have names like Peace. It's DC Assault, it's the Rough Riders, it's the Gauchos, it's the, it's the Lightning, it's teams like that by and large. We called it Stanford Peace because I had the experience back starting in 2002. Somebody had worked for me. He was at the time a young accountant. Unfortunately, he passed away tragically many years ago now. But he was a young accountant, and somebody that he grew up with had started an organization called, at the time, Playing for Peace, which became Peace Players International. And Peace Players International was an organization, is an organization that is now celebrating its 20-year anniversary. As Connie had mentioned in my bio, I've been on the board there since about 2005 and had been the chairman for the past 7 years until stepping down last summer. It is an organization that uses the game of basketball to bring kids together in conflict regions around the world. And so it operates in the Middle East, between Arab and Jewish children, in South Africa, between blacks and whites, in Northern Ireland, in Cyprus, where there's historic conflict between Greek and Turkish Cypriots. We're doing some work in Rwanda right now. We're doing, and then we have a partnership with Nike where we're doing tremendous work in inner cities across America, including Chicago, New York, in Brooklyn particularly, LA, Baltimore, and Detroit, and doing work bringing inner city communities together and focusing the light on social justice, again, through the game of basketball. And so in 2002, when I met the Tuohys, Sean Tuohy first, and then later Brendan Tuohy, who founded Peace Players, they played overseas in Ireland to extend their professional careers, or to extend their basketball careers, and began teaching in basketball in a Protestant community and then a Catholic community. I went, so I learned about it. It was incredibly inspiring, the story. And then right after retiring, my dad and I went to Israel and got to see Peace Players firsthand. And now I've been back probably to Israel in particular 6 or 7 times now with Peace Players, and have some dear friends and people that are like family to us that have come visited us, that we've gone to visit, groups of girls in particular that I met when they were 9 years old and coached when they were 9 years old and worked with when they were 9 years old, Palestinians and Jews that have come together through basketball. And now they're 18 or 20 or 22, or in one case, 26 years old, and have served in the Israeli army or are at university in Ramallah and are the best of friends all through this, wonderful game of basketball. And having been part of that early on, it occurred to me that while peace is, to use a phrase, is not the absence of war, it's the existence of connection. And it was being used to connect people who otherwise had grown up learning to hate one another. In my case, in the case of Lenwood Lotta, we could use it not to bridge divide between conflict regions, but to help kids connect to a brighter future. And so we called it peace, and away we went. And you know, if there's a title to be given to this discussion, it's really that doing well and doing good aren't at odds with one another. You don't have to trade off. And hence we've had immense success on the basketball court, and haven't had to trade anything off. In fact, have been able to influence kids off the basketball court in the same way. I'm gonna close my sort of prepared remarks in two ways, right? One is I feel like I should pay homage to what today makes me tick, and obviously it goes without saying that family is still at the heart of that. And obviously Jeannie and Hannah and Charlotte and Sophie and my brother and sister-in-law, nieces and nephews and stepmom and mom and dad of blessed memory are all part of that. But and that goes without saying. But if you recall, I said that there were 4 pillars in my family, and faith I won't go into, except to say that the fact that this is the JCC's call is something poignant, meaningful to me. But the other 2 pillars are education and athletics. Athletics, I think I've spent a lot of time on. The educational part, I probably spent less time on. But I want to mention that what makes me tick is the idea of closing the opportunity gap. And to level the playing field between those that have and those that have less. And I reflect on it a lot when we're talking to a potential donor, frankly, or when we're talking to a setting like this, that if my children struggled in school, it meant they got a B, or they were at a B-, or they didn't put in the work that they otherwise could have put in, and so knew that they had to dig in. And so with that, though, they would go to a private tutor. And I'm using my children, not to mean my children, but to mean the children of people that were born on second base, not born at home plate. And so they'd go to a tutoring session, and they'd go to private tutoring, and they'd pay $150 an hour to move them from a B to an A, or they'd pay some sum of money to help them with their college application process, or they would get college preparatory exam work, so SAT prep, ACT prep work, and that would take them from second base to third base, or third base home. And that's all great. It's all great. And I don't begrudge the ability to do that for my children, or the ability for anybody else to do that for their children. But what I would say is that opportunity, to the extent you had that at hello, for lower income kids, you had it at goodbye, because education has not been demonstrably meaningful, or has not been demonstrably the lifesaver in a less affluent community than it has been in a more affluent community. That's not to say that it couldn't be, and it's not to fall on my liberal sword, but it is to say that it's simply not the case that lower income and many minority community settings, that education, that there are as many clear-cut examples of educational success being the ticket out. And so in my family, in the proverbial my family, you know, there was no doubt that education was going to be a lifesaver. In the family of some of the communities in which we serve, and some of the children that we influence, they're first generation Americans, or they're first generation college students. And so the morass that they have to go through in order to get to the same place that our children have to go to is incrementally harder. And so one of the conversations that I had with somebody recently, and it was a 29-year-old who I've known since he's 17, and he came in to talk to me about a thought he had on an entrepreneurial pursuit. And so, you know, I talked to him regularly, but he came in and he said, I want to talk to you about this. And he had an idea. And we talked about the idea, and it wasn't harebrained. It wasn't a harebrained scheme, but it was an idea that that I didn't think necessarily it was where he should be spending his time and money. And we talked about it a little bit. And I said to him, you know, won't use his name, but I said, John, I said, look, here's the challenge. The challenge is cyclical poverty, right? Why is that the challenge? I said the challenge is cyclical poverty because in the case of, if you don't believe that education is your ticket out, right? Or you don't believe that grinding is your ticket out, and instead you play the lottery. Well, the reality is most people playing the lottery lose. That's the reality of it. And so if you play the lottery and you lose, your children are in the same position you're in, which is the same position that your grandchildren are, well, your grandparents were in. I said, however, if you bank on education or grinding it and really digging into making the most you can out of a more traditional career, then you're going to be in a situation where your grandchildren are going to look back and say, oh my gosh, look at the investment my grandfather made to give me a better life. And I think that unfortunately, too often, the risk reward inherent in gambling is what is the ticket out. And so whether that's sports or entertainment or traditional gambling or illegal pursuits, that's what gets left with as the idea of how we get out of this situation. And that's what we're trying to save kids from through Stand for Peace and Beyond Limits. And so that's, you know, that's what makes me tick. The basketball is just a tool to getting there. And I'm going to wrap up now, and I'm going to wrap up with one thing that we tell. It wouldn't be the story it is if we didn't connect the basketball and my past life. And so I'm going to try to do that really quickly by calling it where the rubber hits the road. And this is what almost in every practice I'll tell my basketball kids, and it'll resonate hopefully with you because it's so much more than basketball, and over time they get it. But I always say the game is always won by the team that feels least uncomfortable. Your worst and most entrenched habits are going to come when you're under the greatest amount of stress. Practice according to your aspirations. Focus on the process, not the result. Play with urgency. It's got to matter to you. It's more valuable to be great at being good than it is at being good at being great. You're rarely as good as you think you are or as bad as you think you are. Strong beats weak, smart beats strong. play for one another, not just with one another, and enjoy the journey, good, better, and best. Thank you.
What can I say? It was just absolutely awesome. Absolutely incredible, Brian. I cannot thank you enough. Just this incredible combination of being grounded, yet being this incredible visionary. And this is, I mean, again, I'm speechless, and people who know me, I'm not usually speechless, but thank you so, so much. It was just absolutely amazing and wonderful. And the comments in the chat are, you know, you're a rock star, you're inspiring, so fabulous, et cetera, et cetera.
Well,
So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't know if anybody does have a question, you can let me know. I don't see anybody, or if you want to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. I don't see anybody. Okay, well, I'm going to give you a shout. I don't see anybody. I understand, because I think Brian, the next thing you need to be doing is going on do a TED Talk for sure.
well, thank you.
Definitely would be one of the best. I just want to give you a shout out from Mo Concepcion, who is our JCC Managing Director of the Camps and Sports and Recreation. And he's coached with you for the last 2 years at Trinity, and now he's with you at Notre Dame. And he sends his best. He's sorry he couldn't be here this evening. He had a couple of questions, and I had a couple, but you answered everything and more so. So I'm not going to.
It's more important for Mo to be back home figuring out how we're going to win our playoff game on Thursday.
Oh, okay. I won't tell him you said that, but maybe Shannon will. I think Shannon might be on the phone.
All right, good.
Okay. So I would just want to thank everybody for coming. This was fabulous, and it's our first J Talk really since the beginning of the pandemic. So I can't imagine anything better. And it's wonderful to see everyone. Hope you see you at our upcoming activities and programs.
Well, yeah, Connie, thank you so much, and thank everybody on the Zoom call. It's certainly the faces I see are my loved ones, immediate and extended, and it really means a lot to have you all here. So thank you.
And I want to wish everybody who's celebrating Passover and Easter wonderful holidays, and we should have a wonderful, healthy, and happy spring going into summer.
Yeah,